Hi, you're listening to Mindset, a weekly tech podcast that is shaping what you know and think about AI. My name is David, I'm a tech journalist, and with me here is Filip, an AI executive. Our topic for today, or for this episode, is open source AI. How free is it really? What is it? Why should you care? Filip, let's dive right into it.
Yeah, let's do. I would like to start maybe, David, asking you as a tech journalist and entrepreneur, like you are to some extent outsider to the topic of the AI, open source. So what does it sound for you like? What would you expect from the AI open source to be compared to like commercial AI?
I'm not such a novice to the idea of open source. When we come to the topic of open source in AI, the thing that comes to my mind the first is it's something that I can take. For me, for some reason, it's connected to on device mostly. I know it's not only that, but like for me, it's like on device. So I can take it, I can do with it, and there are no constraints whatsoever. I could build up on it if I knew how to, but I would say the freedom, but like most dominantly is, as I already said, is like having it on device. And now you can maybe tell me if I'm completely wrong or just like a little bit.
Okay, so far what I heard from you is that you would like to have it free for yourself to use in like your own use cases, not being prescribed what you want to use it on, and then potentially build on it.
Yep.
And you would like to have it kind of somewhere in your own vicinity, in your own devices, if possible, right?
Okay, let me give you an example. So there are already tools, apps that you can download that run on open source large language models and so far. So you're basically, and there is an open market for that, so you're basically just paying for the tool. There's no subscription. It's kind of refreshing to get something, if you think back, like how the world was nice, that I only paid for something once and then had it forever. And sometimes those who created these softwares would come and do an upgrade or an update just for free because there was a large community using it. So I was trying and experimenting with such tools already, and I have to be honest, I kind of liked it. There was an opportunity to also connect it to, directly through an API to, I don't know, ChatGPT or others, but you could still use that downloaded large language model that was sitting in your computer and do stuff with it without any constraints, without having to think about, okay, there's a monthly subscriptions or there is, credits that I might run out of. It was just there. I could use it. I could use it forever. Obviously, it was, kind of limited in the capability, but still the idea was very refreshing, especially nowadays.
Cool. So I think you're pretty dug into it. So let me take it piece by piece. So let me start with the last thing which you said and it's in your own device. I think a lot of people take this as a psychological limitation because once it is in a cloud, once you need to kind of access somewhere, there's always in the future a chance that somebody can kind of take your access away or make it paid for some. So a lot of people want to have it, as you rightly said, on your own device, just to be sure that I cannot be kind of cut off from the access to it in future, right? To be honest, like in AI, this is not necessarily always practical because maybe in order to run the AI, you need to have a hardware which is difficult to get on your own computer, on your own server. So even though a lot of people think about it this way, that I would like to have a model, including me, to be honest, I would like to have a model on my own device. It's also quite impractical because if you have a large language model which needs a lot of GPUs to run on, you don't probably have such a device at home, and then it becomes a little bit of a question. But I think it's like well settled. Where you're completely hitting the mark is expecting of an open source that it is free to use in like unlimited use cases. You can choose whatever you use it for, or you can also build up on it. But maybe comparison to the usual software, the building up on it is a bit more complicated in AI because again, imagine you have a model, maybe you want to retrain it or like tune it to your own needs. It takes a lot of compute power again. So may you have a cluster on which you can retune the AI. You probably could like train your own as well. So it's usually not really worth the effort to take an open source model and like try to tune it to yourself too much. Because then you're spending money, which is basically could have used the commercial product first place. So that's how I look at it. And I'm glad that in the 3 dimensions which you mentioned, I think we're really hitting the point. So I think we have a quite good understanding of the open source AI here on the table.
Okay, let me just like look at it from 2 different ways, because I think I have the mindset of a regular user, right? Like I come in, I have a particular use. I want to use that piece, that tool, that software, that app for. Let me give you an example. I work a lot with audio to text, text to audio, vice versa. And so this use case for me is kind of crucial to have, it's like to be available and use it right away. And I would imagine for most people, this is similar, right? Like, oh, I just want to write an email. I just want to want the AI or the app just to write me a project of different kind of project. So the limitedness of it doesn't, in my mind, it's not such a bad constraint. Whereas you're looking at it from the mind of like an executive, a manager, someone who develops the tool, and obviously, putting limits on it for you, that's like a huge, red flag.
Yep.
For me, not.
Yep.
So I think that we are like, there are 2 worlds that we are looking at the same time when it comes to open source.
And that's interesting, mind, because I think that a lot of softwares where you were referring, let's say, I don't know, what comes to my mind, like a zip software, right? Like compression. So it's basically a tool which can be equally used in like end user on your B2C device if you wish to, or is used in some kind of a commercial processes. You're moving things from one place to another. You need to compress them to kind of say the bandwidth that you need to transfer the file. So there, like the WinZip or whatever you've been using before, kind of to zip compress the files, was equally useful to the, let's say, a layperson user and also a professional. Now with AI, it's a bit different. Now you're rightly kind of pointing out, because it's interesting, but I don't think so that the way that this things stand now, we are gravitating to having like this WinZip for the regular user as well. I think when the open source AI, we are more gravitating towards that the companies use the open source to develop the things faster and cheaper, but will be still packaged as a tools. I don't think so. We're running into, there's a few exceptions. Like for instance, Stable Diffusion may be one of the exceptions, because a lot of people, even not professional in that area, use Stable Diffusion as a kind of product. But also that is a little bit bundled into a bit of a web page or something where it's a bit more useful to use. I don't think so we're going to get to the point where you're going to, as a regular user, call an API and get something. You probably need a wrapper or kind of a user interface on top of it. So this limitation is probably not an issue for you, because somebody needs to solve the limitation for you to be using the tool first place. But as you rightly pointed out, me leading a teams which need to develop the tools, for us is like, okay, now we do this. If we ever want to pivot in future into a little bit left of what we are doing now, will still the model allow us, or there's like a strict wall that, okay, you can't use it for next use case because that's like ruling it out of the conditions. So this is how we think about it.
Okay, maybe just add one more layer on top of that, because you opened there a door through the API. So, for example, by using Anthropic's Claude, it allows you to quickly build, apps, web pages. It's directly connected to Amazon's cloud. So there is this connection. And someone who's well versed in it would tell you, sure, like just go in, build an app, build the website that you need. So you have the use case and you can say, okay, just build me this and I have the model, but I need the interface. But that's already a very complicated step for a layperson like me, because you kind of have to have the technical mind and have to understand user interfaces. So I actually have the tools to do it, but like I don't have, and we will be coming back to the world of mindset, but I don't have the mindset to do it. So it almost feels like there could be even a market opportunity, just as ChatGPT was doing these apps. Someone could come in and do, okay, so you can download an open source model, have it on your device, and there will be a marketplace for different apps that you can, download and connect to that. And I'm not trying to be like entrepreneurial too much over here, but it just like came to my mind when you were talking about it.
And there is, and we're going to come to that today. But maybe I'd like to ask you a question here, David. So we just described what the open source AI is, and we kind of exchange a little bit like what would you use it for as a layperson or professional. So just I would like to kind of have your guess. So how obscure do you think the open source is? Is it a prominent thing? Is it more like just few nerds using it? What would you expect?
Well, I cheated. I looked into our notes.
You did?
So I know. Yeah. I was preparing for this podcast, so I know, and it kind of surprised me.
Okay, but what would be the guess before you?
Definitely. My guess before would be obviously the closed models are being used much, much more.
All right. Yes, and that is the truth actually. But in reality, the open source is getting pretty prominent as well. I mean, it's difficult to estimate because there are no official numbers for the time being. But to be honest, like what we know that ChatGPT just recently, OpenAI announced that it's a billion of queries every day. So it gives you a bit of an idea of, because usually you would say that the users will have several queries a day. So it gives you an idea that it's probably in like double-digit millions, at best like three-digit millions of users who are using it on a regular basis. And now there is a way to compare it, because if you look at Hugging Face, which we're going to probably talk today more about, which is the most prominent open source platform for AI, they have 2.5 billion downloads of the model per month, right? So then you would assume again that if somebody downloads it, it's using it more than once, maybe even developing a tool for somebody else to be using it. Of course, not everybody who downloads finishes the project, so it's also not like equal sign, but it gives you a little bit of a balance, right? So the original idea that it must be obscurity has actually proven. And when I try to do, because what I actually do monitor what's development on a Hugging Face. I have a bot who collects regularly these stats and tries to understand. And I'm super happy to share with the viewers and listeners in notes of the podcast episode, like a survey which I did, an analysis on that. And this actually proves that the share of open source is like almost 35%, which is pretty stellar. I was surprised. I would expect it to be somewhere in like low teens, to be honest. But I was surprised it's actually literally 1/3 of people who are developing AI things are already using an open source for that.
You already mentioned Hugging Face. Maybe let's jump right to Hugging Face is one of the platforms that you can find such models. There are obviously others, but I also believe that Hugging Face is
the biggest and the most used.
Yeah.
What would you like to know about Hugging Face? It's a portal where you can go and try the models, which is interesting because a lot of back in internet times, when internet was starting, when you had something open source, you only had like a download place, like www.downloads.com was the most famous one, right? Where you would go and you would get it. But this one is also, you not only have to download, because very often the models are tens of gigabytes big. So like you would not download it and then like find out that it doesn't work for you. So they do offer also chance to try not all of them, but the most prominent them directly on the portal. So you can run a query and like you will get the result from the model and you can see the result. And I think this is actually a very smart move because it's accelerating the use of the open source much more. Because if the first attempt is somewhat interesting or useful, then you're probably more inclined to download the model and try yourself.
How does Hugging Face make money?
that is a mystery to me as well. But of course, you can host the models to be kind of paid. They also probably from the big players who want to, like Meta, who want to kind of have their models adopted, probably they do, like Meta does contribute to the running cost of the Hugging Face somewhere. But it's not disclosed, so it's nothing that I would be aware of officially. So it's just my expert guess that this is the way. Of course, like they run a large portal with a lot of viewers, so you can get some ad content promoted there as well. But I haven't seen too many of it, to be honest. So I think they mainly build it as an open source community as well, and then they package the things into the libraries which they send, because they also create a Python libraries which you can use, and maybe like maintaining these libraries or offering them to development teams is like a B2B income that they have.
Because I don't recall there being a donate button or anything like that.
I haven't seen donate button either.
No, that's interesting. Okay, do you know of any others like Hugging Face?
There are a few of more of them. I don't have them by top of my mind, but honestly, when I was doing research, I also asked kind of based on visits what the share is, and like Hugging Face was taking like 85% of the all. So I'm not even sure if it's like worth mentioning the others, because there is nothing that I'm aware of that you would need in AI space which you would not find on a Hugging Face.
It's interesting to see that so many times, and it really does. I'm not saying it's always in technology, but like if you are like really first one and do it right, like the advantage that you have can be in some regards pretty steep.
Yeah, I would have a question to you, David, because one of the things when we were discussing at the beginning, what would you expect of the open source, was that it should do the thing, right? So by design, the open source tools are something which has a less money poured into developing, because it's like community developing it. So one would expect that the open source tools might or should be behind the commercial tools. So for you as a user of it, what would be the gap that you would be willing to accept in capabilities of the open source? So how much behind the commercial tools can the open source be for you to be still considering its usage? Because if the gap is big, like it's, 5% of the commercial tool, it's probably not even worth trying. So where would be your pain level for that?
I would say it's definitely around 5 to 10%, but it's very subjective. Also, I would say I expect from the commercial tools to have a much nicer user interface, just because I'm paying for it, so I can kind of look away if the software, open source software, is kind of like not top of design as we come to experience from these big technology companies nowadays. So that's like one point of view, and the other one is I think I still would like it to prefer to be like 90-95% doing still what the commercial tool would be doing.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, again, if you look at there's a lot of leaderboards or like chatbot arenas and similar ways to try to compare. And when the open source models enter the fight, they usually end up with being weaker. So it is still true that you need to have a lot of investment to make like a top-notch model. Even though, surprisingly, the models which are open source, and very often not even the ones like done by big companies like Meta, even like a smaller teams can still do a lot of interesting models being created out of the smaller teams effort. They are usually about up to 15% behind the commercial tools. So if you look at the rankings, and that is because like ultimately they catch up, but there's a time gap. So the commercial models have this 15%, 10 to 15% advantage, and then the open source close it with another model's development. So they try to iterate, but when you do a snapshot, where if you took like the most powerful model now and you take a most powerful model now available in open source, there will be still 10 to 15% difference. So would that be in a range where you would be okay with that?
Yeah, I think yes. I think definitely yes. But we spent 20 minutes talking about open source AI, and we've been, kind of like going around it, and we haven't mentioned Meta's Llama model, which by all headlines. Is one of the biggest models. Meta is trying to position it as a big one. I'm kind of putting it out there just out of the blue, because wherever nowadays I hear a discussion about AI open source models, like Llama is all over the map, and it's kind of fascinating for me to see and kind of I'm curious what you think. So we can explain what Llama is, okay? So let's do this first. But the second thing is, with Llama AI and the development Meta has been doing for the past 2 years, I kind of had this feeling that in the community, it almost like resurrected this like nice image of the whole company, just because of doing this on such a state-of-the-art scale. And plus they added open source to it, which again, let's leave it as a third question we can talk about, because there's some criticism around it. So what is Llama, and then what you think about Meta's rebranding around Llama?
So let's get in one by one. So Llama. The most recent revolution of the AI has been kind of launched with ChatGPT moment, right? And what Meta and Mark Zuckerberg were clever enough, so because OpenAI brought the ChatGPT, and it was kind of free to use. It still is kind of free to use to some extent, but it was still a tool which you had a paid version of. So if you really wanted to use heavily for yourself, you have to pay for that. And Meta was clever enough to position themselves. We're going to give you the ChatGPT quality for no money attached, no matter how heavy you want to use it, right? But if you think about it, then that immediately positioned Meta as an interesting tool for more a developer side of a table. Because if you are just a regular user, you can go and use Anthropic or Claude or ChatGPT for free, almost for whatever you need. Like, it's difficult to run into a limit for a regular user. Okay, if you want to use it for your work, like you help yourself to code, you help yourself to develop images, cut video, whatever, then you get into the issue that the free tier of Anthropic or OpenAI's ChatGPT does not make the cut for you, but Llama does. And they were kind of clever enough to bring the quality, comparable quality, well, this minus 15% as we talk about it, and no money's attached, with few caveats we come to later. So, but if you ask my opinion as a person who is kind of responsible for developing AI solutions, I think it's a PR stunt. It's really a PR stunt from Meta and from Zuckerberg, and I do agree that it got this halo effect of good back. The Meta is a good back company again, right? Like return to being the good guys. In reality, why I think it's a PR stunt, because Llama is just replicating ChatGPT. And if you really work in an AI environment, like there is so many other things what Llama does not do, right? Llama does not compete with Sora, right? So it does not offer like a video delivering. Llama is not competing with translations, dedicated things. Llama is not competing with kind of AIs which describe images, categorize them, and do the other things. So this is why I think it's a like clever PR stunt, because they managed to create, and they are the only company who like push on declaring it's an open source. You would be surprised to find out that Salesforce has a lot of open source models, which are really good. But
I'm genuinely surprised.
Yeah, but you don't hear Salesforce boasting about it. They just kind of left it in Hugging Space, and it's there. There's a lot of Chinese companies also like offloading their models if you dare to use them. So that is why I think it's a PR stunt. So it's not really covering the AI really well, but they are only one talking about it as openly as open source. And like they are riding the wave of trying to replicate what ChatGPT. And as ChatGPT is AI in many people's mind now, they're kind of colonizing the space of being an open source AI.
Let me push back on the idea that they're just doing the basic stuff and using it as PR. The Meta AI research team did come up with models that addressed audio creation, audio translation, video.
Llama.
Yes. That's what I'm getting into. Is there a world where it can be, stitched into Llama somehow?
No.
Why?
This is a separate tool. Because in AIs, the situation is like in open source usual programming, you would see it as a kind of a components which are built by design to talk to each other. What is funny that the open source AI models are not built to talk to any other open source models. They are just an isolated model that you can use without limitations, but they are not necessarily like, hey, and now I can take a stable diffusion and connect it to Llama and like take, I don't know, a free version of a Flux or whatever and let them talk to each other. No, that's not true. Like maybe there's like heavy way for you to program the backend for them to talk, but it's no way like you as a lame person gonna take and like combine them into a geared model. That's not the case.
Okay, there are a couple of things there. So Llama is just one of the models, right?
Yep.
Like, and it's still being developed, and it's still being. And I give you credit for that. Compared with ChatGPT, like whenever ChatGPT comes up with a new version, you can see Google's Gemini, Anthropic, and also Meta's Llama come up. Oh, we also have a model that's like very close to ChatGPT, whatever model that is. And in case of ChatGPT, they have actually come away from GPT, right? Like the new models are O1, OpenAI O1, OpenAI O1 Pro. Who knows whether we will get O2, 3, and so on. And but the app, the interface that you're using it through is okay. Nowadays is the ChatGPT app and also Sora.
Yep.
In case of Meta, they have Meta AI, which they are going to build, or they're already building in, their apps, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and so on. Unfortunately, here in EU, we don't have access to that, which we can leave as a question afterwards. But the question is like, okay, so there's Llama, which is being heavily PR'd, but then there is Meta AI, and actually Meta AI does pull in all these other models. So it's not just text-based Llama.
That's true. But to be honest, just to maybe for a few seconds to go back to your question about if Meta really meant it and if they really wanted to do a good thing for open source community, to me, as if I look at how the models that they develop, and it's not only Llama, also the other ones that they have, if I look at how it looks, I think what they're doing is they're developing for themselves to be used in their applications and like a side effect, releasing it to the community. Because I also noticed that if you look at the capabilities which they are using in WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, or whatever else you can think of, very often they follow the kind of releases of the models of themselves. So they develop something which they would need themselves, but they would not license it from anybody else. They invested into it. And by the way, they release it on a site, but this releasing on a site is the PR start. I don't really mean they don't really need to have the community building on it, but they say, okay, and we do it to be interesting, to be different, to be kind of positioning, to be the good guy, to be not charging for it, right?
Okay. I also heard that by just the virtue of making it open source and having this communication around like putting it back to community, this was a huge appeal for AI engineers to come to work for them, because I will be working on something that is state of the art, that will give back to the community, and that probably more people are going to get their hands on. So that's like one thing, and the second thing is, if we, as you correctly pointed already out, is different open source don't actually work together.
They don't combine.
If you want to combine them, so that means if I have a large platform and I build the underpinning model that platform will work on, in this case, the social apps of Meta, and having Llama as the main language, very similar to, as you would say, I don't know, whatever iOS is, using the developing language to create apps for iPhones. They basically did the same, and so everything is going. If you want to get anything that you create up there, you have to be using Llama.
Yeah, kind of.
So
it's a little bit of a lock-in.
Yeah.
It is a little bit of a lock-in. I do agree.
Almost like a Trojan horse, right?
Yeah, it is a little bit like a Trojan horse. I agree.
Okay, is there anything else we should say about Llama?
Yeah, well, I think Llama is one of the examples because you said you do want to have it on your own device or not. So let's talk about a little bit of that part as well. Because one of the things of open source is that it comes in a raw format. So you have the model, but let's take aside the Hugging Face APIs which you can use to test it. If you really want to use it, you need to actually create an environment for it on your own premises, either in your own cloud environment or your own server or local PC environment. So in some sense, what is a bit different about Llama and the other things is that it cannot be used by a non-educated user at this point of a time. It's not ready to be used by a regular Joe who wants to have kind of an application built. And this is interesting because this is exactly what you said. So in order to work with the open source models, you have to be the upper skilled part of the labor for AI. So not only it attracts the skilled ones, but we're going to talk maybe till the end, shall a regular person who is not involved in AI be interested or not. And one of the interesting implications is that if you are, then your salary is actually going to be higher because in order to be able to work with the open source, you need to know more. You need to be able to integrate it into the cloud technologies and the surroundings. So it's also a kind of an interesting self-fulfilling prophecy. So not only the AI is bringing the open source AI is bringing the more interested and more agile people, but it's also bringing a higher quality of a people. And therefore, like you might be thinking about it, hey, I want to be part of that wave. So it's a kind of magnetic as well, which is an interesting stunt which they managed to do.
Well, let's say there's a criticism from the open source community, which I think was growing in recent months, where the leaders of the open source community, they came up and you could see headlines in Financial Times, New York Times, and they were kind of bashing Meta for labeling Llama as open source because there is actually, when you read the documents, like when you read the licensing for Llama, there are kind of a few points that go against the idea of that being open source.
Okay. Yes, so let me explain that in a bit. Because I had the moment when I was working on a data where especially Cambridge Analytics and the other cases were not really bringing a good vibes to data community. So I can't be really kind of taken for thumbing up Meta for the history. But I think this accusation of not being really open source is kind of not fair for Meta. But before I get there, maybe just one thing. So before we understand if Meta is really open source, we should ask ourselves the question, so is open source really free to use? And can you kind of really make it whatever you wish with it, right? And for that one, user going through it needs to be very careful about the type of a license on which the model is issued. So there are kind of 4 different most commonly used type of the licenses. And some of them are like, really, you do whatever you wish. Just don't do bad things, don't kind of harm people, don't like do illegal things. But otherwise, you don't have to tell us what you do. You can do whatever scale you wish to do. That's like the Apache 2.0 is the most kind of promising license because you can do anything. Then MIT and then the other ones come. So if you have this license of using open source, very often it says you can use it for free. You don't have to pay for that. You can change it. Some of them require, if you change it, you need to quote the original kind of owner, not to repackage it and sell it as your own. So this is, I think Creative Commons have this limitation that, okay, you can tweak it, you can do your own version of it, but you need to recognize that the underlying material is from that provider. Some of them have a very explicit saying, okay, You are only allowed to use it in certain contexts. So you're not allowed to use it for space, for nuclear things, for biological research or whatever. But very often there are models which you are only able to use for development purposes or like educational purposes, right? So you can't do a commercial use. And this is something which you have to be careful for. Now we come to the Llama being accused of not being open source or not. So what Llama does not limit you necessarily in what use case you want to use it for. So you can have either build your own chatbot, you can have an educational portal, you can have whatever you wish. What it does limit you in some sense is when you get really big. So if you build a business which is having a lot of users, I think the threshold is about 1 million users, if I remember correctly. So if you're already building an application which is like bringing you substantial revenue, they don't want to like get it for free for you. So then you have to reach out and you need to license it. But again, most of the users will not get into that arena. Like I wish my projects had 1 million users, but that's not the case for many of us. So that is for is free. So, one thing why the community was attacking Meta for not making really open source is they said, well, but you didn't release the training data. You didn't release the actual way that you did it or the approach. You said very little on how you got. So it's like, take it or leave it. I must say, come on. Like, it's a model which it costs probably like $200-300 million to train, and you would be kind of trying to bash Meta for like not telling you what exactly data went in. Like that's probably not the way you should think about it, because the way that the community is spoiled, they would like to, okay, I need to know what you put in, so if I want to tweak it, I can know what else needs to be put in. But come on, like, most of us will not have a cluster of, 10,000 or 100,000 GPUs to train alternative of it. So why would you really care?
Okay, let me take what you just said and put it in the perspective of, I have recently been on a tech business conference, hosting a panel between a state representative from EU and a spokesperson for Meta.
Yep.
And Meta in recent months has been shopping around its Llama and, trying to contract, not even contract, just try to offer it to states. Oh, it's free. You can use it. You can build your own stuff on it. And in the regard that you don't know how it was trained, what's in it, and we know that states have like the rigor when it comes to security, whatever. Like it has to be like really high bar. And now you see even like states like France, they're speaking to, I think, guys in Estonia. We see also Meta talking to the Slovak government and governments all around. And from the perspective of like citizens or even like specialists looking at it, doesn't it actually get you to reconsider and say, oh, actually, if it's, if there is a way or if there is a possibility that this is going to become an underpinning technology of like some future state infrastructure, wouldn't you want to know these things?
Yes, you would. And my quick answer to that is, I don't think that open source like Llama will ever be for military use cases or for like security use cases. But what we don't realize that there is probably tons of state employees who are now using ChatGPTs and Claudes on their private accounts because it still helps to make their work, but they can't use it officially. So I think there would be a room to make it a bit more controlled and official. But I don't believe that if you get to the scale that you actually going to operate the Llama in hundreds of millions of users, that it will stay free. I think it will come to the model that you'll need to contribute a little bit to development, because once it becomes a standard, then you can't afford for the standard to become obsolete or like prehistoric, right? So you need to invest. And I think the strategy for Meta here is get the user base and then kindly ask them to contribute to making it better, because that's the only way to support it into the future.
But isn't so the best or one of the best positioned in this regards to come to the state or any country and say, oh, we actually have a previous relationship, you're already using a lot of our software
Yep.
to run on is actually Microsoft.
Yep.
And Microsoft does have also pretty state-of-the-art AIs developed mainly by OpenAI. They do something on top of it themselves. Maybe we can dedicate a whole episode to kind of untangling what's going on in that relationship right now. But like let's not get into it too deep. But what I'm trying to ask is Meta trying to be and act as Microsoft in this regard to try to develop?
It looks like from the outside it looks like get the feet into the open door with the open source model, and then try to kind of build a platform for future. That is exactly how it looks to me from the outside.
Because also on this panel I was hosting, I was stunned by the state representative and the spokesperson from Meta to sound exactly the same.
Yeah,
it actually really stunned me.
Yeah,
that so they were saying, okay, we need to be more open. We need to have like better regulation. So no regulation, but like better regulation. What is better regulation? It's always like in these minds, it's like less regulation. And then we have to be like more flexible, and let us connect with private sector, private businesses to do this, because we're poor states. There's like other stuff we need to invest in. There's like healthcare, education, that is kind of like more important to us being seen to pour money into than this, and these companies are coming in and trying to offer this for free. So why not?
Let me close this topic with an easy statement. I don't think so countries like United States of America or Australia or UK will ever have a state model from Llama, and that's probably what describes and answers your question. So maybe there is a market for it, but the biggest will not choose this option, exactly because they would also like to use it for the security reasons, and this would be not doable.
Okay, so let's end it with what the future holds for open source when it comes to AI.
So, this large market share, which we debated, is interesting, because if you think about it other way, if 1/3 of the users are now using open source, that means a half of the revenue of open source, AI companies like OpenAI or Anthropic is in the air, right? Because if there was no open source, they would probably consume most of the remaining users. So it's putting a substantial, let's say, pressure or limit on the business development of the OpenAIs of the world. It's giving a lot of teams chance to try, but it's a little bit like IKEA, right? So it's cheaper, but you need to actually build it yourself, right? So some people appreciate that. Some people kind of don't really like the IKEA moment of you have to assemble it. And it's also true in the moment that once you need to combine the things, that's not necessarily guaranteed, right? So you might have a dedicated team for one area and dedicated from the other area. But I would say what it does, in some of the areas, and we didn't discuss that too much, but in some of the areas like computer vision or like video editing or translations, the open source models are really giving you a choice to build a solution where you are not bounded to somebody else's pricing. You can build it for reasonable time ahead, well, not necessarily future, forever, like we're not this perpetual model, which you were kind of dreaming of, but you can build it into a situation where this works well. And if you are a person involved in AI, it also like providing a better salary, because the people who are able to develop systems will be always better remunerated than the people who are just using commercial tools out of the box.
Okay, I think we could go on, and we will probably get back to the topic of open source and AIs in some.
It's not the last time I was talking about open source AI. Quite sure.
No, definitely not. And I would say that's all for this episode.
Yep. Thanks for kind of walking us through.
find Mindset Podcast, and that's Mindset spelled with AI, in your favorite podcast app. You can find us on YouTube, and don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and our Discord channel. Find all of these links and our email in the description of this podcast. And till next time.
Till next time, David.
Bye.